Okay, recording starts now. And here we are. Welcome to class. I'm going to share the screen. Here's the screen. And as I was saying, we're going to take a look at the first part of the Human Rights Declaration today. On Monday, we'll take a look at the second part of the Human Rights Declaration. And that first draft of this essay number 3 will not be due till November 30th. We will not have a class just before Thanksgiving. We won't have a class just after Thanksgiving, but we will have a class Wednesday the following week. So that's when I'm looking for that first draft of essay number 3. The second draft of essay number 3 won't be due till December 7th. And of course, as always, you can send in your drafts whenever you have them. You don't need to wait for the due date. That's been working pretty well. I've had 3 or 4 or 5 to do at a time, and that's excellent because then I can spend more time on them and give you better feedback. And as I've said before, your essays are excellent and overall doing an excellent job. Just need to do a little bit more work, some of you, on the works cited to make sure, and the in-text citations to make sure that they're going well. Okay, let me just stop for 1 second. And where's my screen? There we are. Okay.
Professor, quick question. We have another essay after this, or have a final or essay for the finals, or this is the final one?
No, there's one more essay, which is a final exam essay. And what I will do with the final exam essay is I will pose some questions, some ideas for you to think about. And in essence, you'll be writing about those topics. There won't be any new reading for the final exam. It'll all be based on the documents we've already read, but I'm going to ask you to write about them in a slightly different way, either comparing them or talking about other issues that I'll ask you in a question format. I will post that final exam soon after Thanksgiving, so you have plenty of time to prepare for that. And it's just like the other essays, it's take home. There's 2 drafts, so you get to send in 1 draft and get the comments and send in the second draft if you need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so we'll get a few more students, but everybody can hear us. Okay, so now let's take a look at the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Just want to bring it up here. Okay, and I will include this in the notes. I know it's on Blackboard, but I'll also put it in the notes so you can have it at your fingertips. So here you are. This particular document that I'm sharing with you was a document that was created on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. It was put forth in 1948. The document that I'm sharing with you is from 1998. Of course, it's well past that now. And as you can see, this resolution was adopted on December 10th, 1948 by the General Assembly of the United Nations. If you're not familiar with the United Nations, it's a very democratic organization. Every member state, every country, or every nation that is part of the United Nations has a delegation that goes there and is part of the General Assembly and has a voice and can speak in the General Assembly. And then there's a ruling group of countries that are the ones who set the direction of the United Nations. And some of them have called the Security Council, and some of those are permanent members, like the United Nations and England and France and Russia and China. And then there's a rotating head of the United Nations. Every nation gets a chance to be a leader. But this is the document that set forth human rights, and it's the world's expression of what human rights are. So let's go. On December 10th, 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted and proclaimed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The full text appears below. We're going to look at that. Following this historic act, the Assembly called upon all member countries to publicize the text of the Declaration, to cause it to be disseminated, displayed, read, and expounded principally in schools and other educational institutions without distinction based on the political status of the countries or territories. So what we're doing here today is exactly what the United Nations expected people to do, which was to share this document in schools and educational institutions so that people could learn about human rights. I doubt if anybody's actually ever seen this document in the school before. Most schools, most teachers don't share these documents, but they really should, since that's what the United Nations asked us to do. That's what the world asked us to do. Okay, so first we start with the preamble. The preamble is simply a statement about the document. Many documents, like the Constitution of the United States, has a preamble which explains why there's a document. And so there's some legal, and this is a legal document, so there's lots of legal language. I'll explain some of that as we go along. But one of the legal words that are put in legal documents is this whereas. These are all these whereas clauses. You can see whereas. And that simply means it's a fact that, or that it is true that. That's all that whereas means. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Now, there are some words in there that we definitely are familiar with. I mean, here, inalienable rights. We all know that the inalienable rights come from the Declaration of Independence of the United States. But of course, here, the United Nations is attempting to expand this idea throughout for all of humanity. And then there's this notion of equality. Notice it's not that word equity, which is thrown around these days a lot. Equity means the same, whereas equality means equal opportunity. Think about that. And then there's another really important word here, which is the word dignity. I've talked a little bit about how formal language can provide dignity when you call children children and don't call them kids. Kids are baby goats, things of that nature. But dignity, and which means respect, is an important aspect of the way people should relate to each other, and you should relate to each other with respect. And so they put that notion in here. Inherent simply means part and parcel of being. So all human beings should be treated with dignity. That's what they mean here. And they're saying that these ideas, dignity, equality, and inalienable rights, are the foundations of freedom, justice, and peace. Important concepts, important ideas, important things that we want to enjoy in the world. Okay. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of the world in which all beings shall enjoy freedom of speech, belief, freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Once again, here, the barbarous acts they're really referring to are all the genocide and things that happened in World War II. And this idea of freedom from fear and want. These are actual, there was a speech by the American president, Theodore Roosevelt, where he talks about freedom from fear and freedom from want. You notice those are not life living in pursuit of happiness, but they are additional concepts of freedom that Roosevelt put forth. And here, there's common people, meaning everyone, right? Whereas it is essential if man, now you notice they're using the word man and the word mankind. This was long before there was any need to say humankind or human beings or political awareness. So don't be thrown off by the words here. This is the language that was used at the time. Really, when we look at historical things, we have to be careful not to judge people in the past by the standards of the present. We can criticize them, we can analyze based on the standards of the present, but not to judge them because they're living in a different time and their mindset is totally different. Nobody knew about electricity in 1700, so you wouldn't criticize somebody about not knowing about electricity. Similarly, the concept of human rights was not generally an idea that people had in 1700. So to criticize them and people in 1700 as not having an understanding of human rights would not be proper. But here, after 1948, when human rights were proclaimed by the World Organization, by the United Nations, you could certainly criticize anybody for not having an understanding of human rights. There you are. Whereas it is essential if man is to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Okay, so here, if man is not, so here, people who don't have freedom, who don't have human rights, are liable to rebel, to have a revolution against tyranny and oppression. If your human rights are being oppressed, then essentially you have a right to fight and have a war and kill in order to obtain those human rights. It's basically what they're saying here. But if you don't want that, if you don't want people fighting all the time, then you should have human rights that are protected by the rule of law. And you notice that's our notion of liberty from the Declaration of Independence. Liberty is freedom under the law. You know what they're saying, human rights should be protected by law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations among nations. Now, here's the notion of world peace. Maybe you've heard that expression, world peace. Sometimes people say that that's what they want when they're asked about what they want for everybody, world peace. That's the goal of the United Nations, is to have friendly relations between nations, among nations. Whereas the peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights and in the dignity and worth of the human person and in equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Look at that right there. Equal rights.
Excuse me,
Yes,
Professor?
yes, yes.
Yeah, when was the United Nations established?
Right after World War II. World War II ended in 1945, and the United Nations, I believe, was established in 1947, and this declaration was issued in 1948.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's not, and it was, the United Nations was formed as a direct result of World War II and the things that happened in World War II. Okay, so
Thank you.
that's okay. And anybody, please interrupt and ask any questions at any time. It's just fine. I think I know how to explain these things clearly, but sometimes I'm not as clear as I should be. Or maybe I'm not pointing out the right things. You might see something in here that I miss. So please speak up. It's not a problem. Certainly, if we were in the classroom, you could just raise your hand. It'd be a lot easier. I know you can raise your hand in this, but I can't always see everybody at the same time. I only see 5 students. In any case, here you see the statement here, equal rights of men and women. And this is 1948. And the women's movement for equal rights really, I mean, it started way back in the 1920s, but it didn't take a lot of, it took on a lot of steam in the late 1960s, about 20 years after this document was published. And throughout the world, that was in the United States, throughout the world, equal rights of men and women is still not something that is accepted everywhere. Certainly some of the most populous countries like China and India don't necessarily believe in equal rights of men and women. Their cultures are rather different. And in other places around the world, that's also true. But here we have the United Nations declaring as a human right that men and women should have equal rights. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. All of the countries that joined the United Nations pledged to support human rights. Actually, I think there are a couple of nations today who have not signed this declaration, but that's something you could find out in your research. I forgot. Okay, whereas a common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of the greatest importance for the full realization of the pledge, now therefore the General Assembly proclaims this universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations. To the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, human rights, both among the peoples of the member states themselves and among peoples of territories under their jurisdiction. So here the statement is, all these human rights are for everybody in the world. First time, 1948, the first time ever that the concept of human rights was proclaimed as something that should be respected by everyone in the world and should be something that should be achieved by governments. I know many of you are familiar with other governments besides the United States government, other governments that certainly don't necessarily support, even though they may have signed this declaration, they don't necessarily implement these human rights in their countries. The United States signed this declaration, and the United States doesn't necessarily implement all these human rights in this country either. We'll get to that. Okay. So let's take a look at it. There's 30, I think 30 articles. We're going to look at half of them today, half of them on Wednesday. Remember, in the Bill of Rights, they were called amendments, but here they're called articles. So here's Article 1. Take a look at that. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. They haven't found a more politically correct word for brotherhood, meaning people should care for each other. But look, they are endowed. Remember in the Declaration of Independence, it was endowed by their creator, right? That was an appeal to the Christian God. But here in the United Nations, we have many different religions and many different gods. So there's no endowed by their creator. There's no creation myth that's involved here. There's no religion involved here. They're simply saying all people have reason, the ability to think, and conscience, to the ability to know the difference between right and wrong, and should, this is a moral command, they should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Rather than fighting, they should cooperate. But here, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are, what race, creed, religion, ethnicity, whatever. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And again, this is something that is not necessarily actually supported by some of the governments that signed this declaration. Big statement.
Can we relate this to the Enlightenment, maybe?
Say that again? Ask that
Can
again.
we relate this to the Enlightenment?
Oh, for sure.
Something like that?
For sure you can. Absolutely. You could definitely. And you could certainly take a look at so one of the documents that came out of the Enlightenment was, of course, the Declaration of Independence. There were others, earlier documents for sure, but for sure you can do that. No question about it.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes when I'm writing my essays, I try to like have some sort of examples from history, but then again, I'm asking myself if I can include maybe from other countries besides the US, but then I'm not sure if to.
Yes, you can definitely bring in information that from experience and from history from other countries as well. Just for everybody, the Enlightenment was a period in Europe mostly, but certainly North America, but in Europe and in some other places where people took a new look at the way people thought and put forth the notion of reason, of rationality as the most important aspect of how people should relate to each other. rather than irrationality, for example, but rationality. And that period of the Enlightenment sometimes is dated from, oh, I don't know, 1650 to 1800. So that's a long period of time where people wrote and thought and put forth ideas about reason being the key aspect of the human beings. But for sure, you can write about any of those things. Feel free. I like that. I actually like that stuff. Okay, so here's Article 1. And you can see they've isolated the notion of, well, in the Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the Bill of Rights, you know, there are the different freedoms in that first amendment. But here, these things are broken down into very specific things. Here's Article 2. Yeah. Everyone, and when they say everyone, they mean everybody in the world, is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. And these are all the things that historically, and even today, people use to separate people and to say one group's better than another, or to discriminate among people, or to be prejudiced about people. These are all these things that human beings have used to divide people and try to make one group better than another. And that's why they're saying here, that's why they put this list here, and they say everyone is entitled to the freedoms set forth, the human rights set forth in this declaration, regardless of any of these things. So none of these things can be used as an excuse to deny anyone their human rights. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or any other limitation of sovereignty. This is here because the colonial period really started to end after World War II. And some countries, for example, first began to rule themselves in 1948 and 1949. Countries like India, huge country, lots of people, but the British had been ruling that country after World War II. India became independent. The country of Pakistan was created at that same time, and India and Pakistan were separated, mostly by religion, but certainly they were independent countries. And many of the countries in the Middle East became independent nations at this time, 1948, 1949, right after World War II, because England used to rule the world, and then they used to have all these colonies. And then after World War II, they suffered so badly, they gave up all of that rule that they had over those countries, and all of those places became independent. But some of them were independent, some of them were on their way to being independent, and they were trusts, and some were not governing themselves, and some had other kinds of limitations of sovereignty with government. So they simply say, it doesn't matter where you're living in the world, and it doesn't matter what type of government you're living under, regardless of those things, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration. Big statement. And all the nations of the world, almost all, have signed this document, even though they don't necessarily adhere to it. Okay, so here's Article 3, right? Everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of person. Short and sweet. There's the right to life. You know all about the right to life. That's the same right to life from the Declaration of Independence. Here's the right to liberty. You know all about the right to liberty. That's the same idea of liberty, freedom within the law from the Declaration of Independence. But then they've added this idea of safety, of security of person. Right? Governments, nobody has the right to make someone else, to violate the security of anybody else, to make someone unsafe. And I know today, many of you walk around and New York City and you're traveling in the subway and you may not feel secure and safe, or as secure and safe as you might have felt 10 years ago. But, you know, this is the idea that if you're walking around out in any place, but let's say the city, the subways, and you're not feeling secure, you don't feel you're being given the right of security of person, then your human rights are being violated. I know there's legal issues and I know there's all kinds of other things that people talk about, but right now we're just focused on this idea of human rights. You need to understand that certainly people out in Ukraine who are under war conditions don't have that human right. I mean, that's kind of obvious, but victims of situations where crime may be rampant or where the law may not be enforced, why then they're being deprived of their security of person. When the law is not enforced, everybody's also being deprived of their liberty. Because the only thing we have, the only freedom we have is liberty, is freedom within the law. If you don't enforce the law, taking away our liberty. And that's a violation of human rights, which is a big deal, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Now, clearly, this is not something that was in the Declaration of Independence or in the Bill of Rights. Even the United States had slavery at that time. We've talked about slavery and how slavery has been all over the world. Slavery still exists today. And you can Google it if you want to know more about it. But here in 1948 is the United Nations saying slavery is a violation of human rights. So servitude would be if making someone work off a debt, for example, and it takes them all their lives, or years and years to work off a debt. But clearly, slavery and the slave trade, buying and selling human beings, prohibited in all forms. This is a blanket statement that there should be no slavery throughout the world. Maybe you would assume that that would be the case. But as I said, there's a lot of human trafficking that goes on in the world today. But here are all the nations of the world saying, let's not have any slavery. I realize it's an idealistic document that they've put forth. Even they realized in 1948 that this was an idealistic document, which is why they started, if you remember, by saying this document should be shared in schools and educational institutions, because they wanted the idea of human rights to be taught to the children, so when they grow up to be adults, they would believe that human rights are something that need to be protected and enjoyed. Article 5. Again, something you might recognize, a little bit like Amendment 5, I guess. No one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Again, torture was something that was often used many countries around, many cultures around the world in order to find out the truth from someone, get them to admit something. So torture, definitely, if you're torturing someone, you're violating the human rights. But just to be cruel or inhumane or degrading is really violating someone's human rights. So even though you might not be torturing them, if you're treating them to degrading treatment, and treating them in a degrading fashion, degrading means taking away their dignity, right? That's what degrading means, taking away the dignity, treating them as if they weren't a person. That's what degrading means. And that's what inhumane means. Inhumane means not in a fashion where human beings, as human beings, should be relating to each other in a spirit of brotherhood, right? They said that up above. So there's Article 5. Again, you're going to be able to write, I'm giving you a lot of latitude with this particular essay. You can seize on the idea of human rights and write about that throughout history, through different countries, for different cultures. That's okay. You can focus on some specific articles, like we're looking at Article 5 now, and you can choose 3 different articles to write about from the Declaration of Human Rights, much the same way you wrote about different amendments in the Bill of Rights. So I'm putting a lot on you to decide how this essay will be structured, but the general theme is human rights. You may think they're top 3 human rights or something like that. That's just fine. Or you might think writing about the fact that certain human rights are not present in certain other countries or cultures or certain times in history or anything, or even the United States today. Anything you want. Okay. Here's Article 6. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Everyone in the world, every human being has the right everywhere in the world to be treated as a person before the law. This is very much related to the notion of freedom and liberty, liberty being freedom within the law, so that wherever you go, this is saying, wherever anybody is around the world, wherever they come from, wherever they happen to be, they should be treated as a person before the law, not as a thing, not as anything non-human person, not a non-person or anything like that. Everyone everywhere has the right to be seen as a person before the law, treated as a person. Big statement of dignity, among other things here, besides a legal statement. Once again, you may know of circumstances where this doesn't actually happen. Article 7. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination or violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. So first of all, here, big statement about how everyone is equal. And that's not the same, it's not the same thing as saying everyone is the same. We're not the same. We're all different, right? Each of us is different from the other, but we're all equal before the law. Everyone has an equal status, an equal standing before the law. This is another way of saying this. No one is above the law. Perhaps you've heard that as well. And no discrimination. You cannot discriminate among people based on those race, religion, color, creed, all those things. Everybody has the same rights before the law. Equal protection of the law. No matter who you are, the law should apply to you and I equally. And then, if anybody violates this Declaration of Human Rights, again, everyone's entitled to protection against that. Not only if they violate it, but if they incite to violate it, if they try to get people to violate it, that's also something that people have a legal right to protection against. So this is, again, a very strong statement about the relationship between this Declaration of Human Rights and the law, wherever it happens to be. Remember, this is a document for all countries around the world. When today there's 130 some odd countries. Every country has different laws. Here in the United States, we have 50 states. Every state has a different law. But in the nations around the world, every nation has a different law. Nevertheless, the United Nations and all the member states have agreed to this. They say that this should be the case. Regardless of where you are, who you are, you're entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Very strong statement. Okay.
So, Professor, we're supposed to choose one of these articles and choose and write a main focus, like the main idea.
That would be fine. That would be fine. But you do need enough content to get to that 600 word level. So that's why I say, maybe you should choose 3, but if 1 will be enough for you to write along, if you have enough to say about it, then that's okay. I can't limit you. People have a lot to say about these things, because once you get thinking about them, you know about how important human rights are. But yes, you can choose 1, you can choose 2, you can choose 3. and write about those in your essay. And those will be,
Thank you. Would they have to be related? Like, let's say, well, they are all related somehow as a right, but I'm just saying, like, do they have to be related as in like topic?
no, you could write about, one could be the right to life, another could be, and there are, wait till we finish, there's a wide range of topics. So no, they don't need to be related, but they're all related in the sense, as you just said, that they're all human rights. That's the relationship, that they're all being declared by the world as human rights, as rights that everyone in the world should enjoy.
Okay, thank you.
Here's Article 8. Everyone has a right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the constitutional law. Tribunal is a court. It's just another word for a court. So everyone has the right to an effective remedy. In other words, if any of the fundamental rights granted, any of the rights granted by law to anybody are violated, then everybody has the right to go to court about that, to sue, to protect yourself, anything like that. This is an attempt, remember, it's for the whole world, and every country has different systems, different legal systems, different constitutions, different ways in which their laws are created, and different types of courts, and the courts operate differently, right? Depending on what country you're in, it's all different. Right? So this is an attempt to make a general statement saying that people have the right to have their human rights protected. And if they're not protected, they can seek effective remedy. They can go to court to try to make someone actually adhere to their human rights. So if the human rights are violated, they can go to court. They have a remedy, a legal way of affecting some kind of remedy for the fact that their human rights were violated. So if you want, can you go to court and sue somebody if your human rights are violated? Yes, that's because that's one of the rights you have as a human being anywhere in the world, according to this. Now, of course, every legal system is different. So, and not everybody adheres to these ideas. Here's another one. Again, very simple, straightforward statement. Look at that. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Here's the key word, arbitrary. Arbitrary means because somebody wants to do it. Arbitrary means not according to law. If you're legally arrested, or you're legally detained, put in jail, or you're legally exiled, sent out of a country, well, that's okay, because that's according to the law. That's liberty. Liberty is freedom within the law. But arbitrary would mean the king doesn't like you, or the dictator doesn't like you, or the president doesn't like you, and so that the president can just arrest you and detain you because they don't like you. So that word arbitrary is a very strong word. It means without the rule of law, outside the rule of law, by whim, by desire. This is an attempt to limit the power of people in charge, because people in charge are the ones who can arrest and detain and exile. So this is an attempt to limit the power of the people in charge by saying they need to follow the law. If the people in charge are not following the law, well, then we're all in trouble. Here's Article 10. We're just going to do a few more, so bear with me here. Everyone is entitled to, in full equality, to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. In fact, this will be the last one we do today, because there's enough for the next time. But look at this. This is very much similar to the Fourth Amendment, which talks about the right to trial. Pretty sure that's the Fourth Amendment. And here, a fair, remember, it's a public trial, public hearing, not secret, right? So not behind the scenes where nobody can see, but where everybody can see, and a fair one, meaning that according to law. And here, an independent and impartial tribunal. Tribunal is court. So again, not the same people that are accusing you of something, or either are deciding on your rights and obligations, or deciding on the criminal charges against you. Those same people can't be the ones who decide your guilt or innocence, or decide whether you have a right to do something or not. It has to be independent of that and impartial. It can't be on the side of the people who are charging you, or on the side of the people who are taking away your rights, or the side of the people who are saying you have a particular obligation. This one's very much like, I believe it's Amendment 4. And so one of the things you can do if you want to, I mean, you could do, you have a wide range of choices. I realize that's a burden. I'm not saying you must write the essay this way. Right here, I'm saying you have to decide what you're interested in, what you want to write about. Certainly, one of the things you could do is you could compare this Article 10 to the Fourth Amendment, or one of the other articles to another amendment, if you wanted to. Or again, you can just choose any 3 of these articles, write about them, or choose a theme, as someone was saying before, and follow that theme along in terms of what these articles say about human rights. I'm going to stop there. We'll cover the others on Wednesday there, because we also did the preamble today. And some of them are a little bit more, a little lengthier to look at. Some of these were really short and easy to understand, but some of the others take a little bit more time to talk about. So that's your introduction to the concept of human rights. That's your introduction to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think you can see how it's going and the kinds of rights that are being put forth here. There are, but in the next articles that we read, I think you're going to find some rights that you might not have considered to be human rights that the world has agreed upon. Okay, so let me just stop there and ask if anybody's got any questions, any other questions about the essay or about what we're looking at, anything like that.
Well, my main question is, if all the stuff we covered here, will this be in the class notes? You know,
Yes.
just to check, just make
Yes.
sure.
Yes, of course, the things that I'm saying are not in the notes. They would be in the recording, which I'm having trouble putting on Blackboard, but all the other stuff is in the notes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. Yes, I'll send you and I'll send that stuff to you.
Question, Professor.
Yes.
Some of these rights are similar to the constitutional rights. So can we do a compare and elaborate on it?
Yes.
Within okay.
Absolutely. You can compare it to the Bill of Rights, the Constitutional rights. You could compare it to the Declaration of Independence. Absolutely. And some of you might know about other declarations of rights or documents about rights in other countries, and you could use those also. But absolutely, you could compare any of the constitutional rights to human rights. Absolutely. It's a fine thing to do. Anybody else? Questions? Concerns? Okay, I'm going to stop.